Welcome to our Party in Place Summer Reading Kickoff. This is the beginning program in a week-long series of events and content that include how to throw your own party in place. Check out our social media for instructions on how to make the perfect party playlist, a great summer cocktail, and everything in between. On Friday and Saturday, we have our annual How-To Festival at 1 p.m. And on both of those days, you can tune in via Zoom and learn how to brew beer, bake bread, play chess. And those are just of the few things that are featured. Go to lplks.org for more information on how to register. And then after the How-To Fest on Saturday, June 20th at 6 p.m., you get to meet our own Deja Brooks librarian cousin, Paige Turner. And we will hand out prizes for best costume, best Zoom background, just to name a few. And then we will have our own party in place via Zoom. And you can find more information on that again at lplks.org, and that link will be in the comments. And yeah, please be sure to check that out. And now I want to introduce our sponsor for this event. Thomas Howe of McGrew Real Estate right here in Lawrence. They have made this program possible, and we at Lawrence Public Library thank them so much for their support. Thomas is here to introduce Nancy, and then we'll get started with the program. I'll hand it off to you, Thomas.
Thank you so much. So McGrew Real Estate is really proud and honored to be able to support Lawrence Public Library's Adult Summer Reading Kickoff this afternoon. Over the years, we've had as many as 4,000 plus people involved in the summer reading program. This is all possible because of the Lawrence Public Library Friends and Foundation. And we would ask for your support of that. You can go to www.lplff.org to support this wonderful program. It helps so many people in our community. Today, we're delighted to welcome Nancy Pearl, librarian extraordinaire, who will help you build your summer reading list. You might recognize Nancy as a regular book reviewer on NPR's Morning Edition. She's the creator of the internationally recognized If All of Seattle Read the Same Book, which was the inspiration for our very own Read Across Lawrence program. Nancy is also the inspiration for the widely popular librarian action figure. Nancy will share her under-the-radar book picks with Lawrence Public Library's book squad leader, Polli Kenn. Please help me welcome Polli Kenn and Nancy Pearl.
Hey, Nancy.
Hey, Polly.
Okay, so are you ready to talk books?
I am always ready to talk books, so
okay.
Thrilled to be here.
Hold on, let me roll my shoulders. All right, let's get this.
Right.
Here we go. Okay, first one is, foundational question. So I just want to talk about reading in general. You've made your name talking about reading in books to the world, and I want to know how reading saved you, because it probably did, like it saved many of us.
Yes. So I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, in a lower middle class family. It was a family that now would be described as dysfunctional. How I would have said it then is that we were purely miserable. We were just, it was not a happy place to grow up, to be. I never felt safe there. And so I spent my childhood at my local public library, which was the Parkman Branch Library on Oakman Boulevard in Detroit. And it was those librarians there, those children's librarians there, especially Miss Frances Whitehead, who really recognized in me someone who was really desperate to not even so much to read, although I was a big reader when I met her, but desperate to escape from where I was. And she opened the world to me. She gave me the world through the books that she recommended. And my favorite story, when I met her, when she came to start working at that library, I was probably 9 or 10, and all that I read at that time were horse and dog books, like many little girls. And in fact, the horse and dog books were all pulled out of the children's fiction section. They had their own labeled section, horse and dog books. And if we went to the Parkman Library today, I could walk you over to where they were at that age. So that's all I read. And Miss Whitehead, who was a very good children's librarian and Canadian, had this wonderful way of dealing with wanting me to read beyond the horse and dog books, and especially all that great British children's literature that she grew up with, Mary Poppins, The Hobbit, all of that stuff she wanted me to read. But there I was stuck on the horse and dog books. So Miss Whitehead would develop this way of coming up to me, and she would say, Nancy, we just got in the new Marguerite Henry book. Well, Marguerite Henry, Misty of Chincoteague, Sea Star, all of those books. And she would say, do you want to be the first person in this library to read that book? Well, my golly, you know, the first person in a library to read a book that you have been waiting for. So of course I said yes, and I would hold out my hand for it. And she would say, oh, but wait a minute, Nancy, before you read that book, I want you to read this book. And she would pull it. It was the first really example of bait and switch that I'd ever been introduced to, but it sure worked. And
so tricky.
You know, what Miss Whitehead did for me is, I mean, I knew when I was 10 years old that I wanted to be a children's librarian. I wanted to do for other children just what Miss Whitehead did for me. And I was a children's librarian. And my first job after library school at the University of Michigan, I got a job at the Detroit Library. And I wasn't in my library as I think about the Parkman Branch Library. I wasn't working directly with Miss Whitehead, but we were colleagues for a few years. And that was so meaningful to me.
That's incredible. Well, I told you this, but I'm going to say it so everybody can hear it. You're the reason that I'm a Reader's Advisory librarian. So, you know, you've paid it forward, I will say. So thank you for that. In your new book, The Writer's Library, you ask authors to share which books have influenced them the most. And I want to know, what are some of your big influences?
Oh, you know, there are so many. I grew up at a time when there were what we might call all the teenage novels by authors like, and your older people my age will remember who were readers will remember these, Betty Cavanagh, Rosamond Dujardin, you know, where so much takes place after school at the soda hangout place. And those, I think, in a way, impacted me negatively, because I thought, well, that's how life is, you know, and it's not. But I do remember still Beverly Cleary, the wonderful beloved, who is still living at 104. I think she just had her birthday. Beverly Cleary wrote a wonderful novel for teens called 15. And there's a scene in it where the main character, Janie, now I have to say I've not reread this book for so many years, but I still remember it so distinctly. Janie has been asked out on a date by this boy that she's been just admiring. And she very carefully plucks like 3 hairs from her left eyebrow. And then to be on the safe side, she plucks 3 hairs from her right eyebrow. So those books were foundational in a way that that they're still so important to me, and I still own copies of them. But I think that the books one of the children's books that meant the most to me, you know, Polly, I believe that one of the reasons reading is so important is that it's a way to gain empathy. And it's a way to, we spend so much time in the limitations of our physical body and our own head. And reading and living with these characters gives everyone a way to get out of themselves and into the experiences of someone else. And one of the things Miss Whitehead had me do was read all the Newbery Award winners. And one of the Newbery Award winners, an early Newbery Award winner, maybe in the 50s, I guess it was Strawberry Girl by Lois Lensky. And it's the story of migrant workers and their experiences following the strawberry harvest north. And I mean, I was in Detroit. I mean, we didn't have strawberry fields we didn't have that kind of migrant workers. But yet I understood, I got Bertie's experience. And see, I remember her name. And that book I don't even own. It's just a book I remember so well. So that was one. Another book that made me aware of, another children's book that made me aware of the way kids can be very cruel to someone who is not like them, is this wonderful book, still in print, called The 100 Dresses by Eleanor Estes. And it's a book, it's not preachy, it's not moralistic, but boy, the message that it has comes through loud and clear. And it's a fabulous book. Doris Gates' Blue Willow is another book that really showed me that there were people different from me, little girls different from me, whose experiences I could share in, if you will. So those books, those kinds of books were very important to me. And of course, all my horse and dog books.
Same. I was a horse girl for sure.
Okay, you're younger, Polly. So I'm sitting in like an alcove in my living room where we have bookshelves. So like I can reach out, like this was one of my favorite horse books called Tick-Tock and Jim. It's about a boy who trades the watch his father gave him for a horse. I love it.
So are you did you just actually keep that, or have you gone out and found the books that you had as a child and bought them again?
So we didn't have any money. In addition to everything else, we didn't have money for books. So the vast majority, I would say the vast majority of the books that I have were books that I found at library sales or used bookstores, and they're getting harder and harder. In a way, out of print books are getting easier to find because of the internet, but these particular books that I was looking for are sometimes hard to find.
Well, thank goodness for the Friends of the Library sales then, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, well, so I mean, looking behind you, I'm going to say, in your books and everything, a prolific reader might be a bit of an understatement to describe you, but I'm going to say it anyway. So what are you reading right now? And how do you keep all of your reading straight?
So I think that one of the things that COVID-19 has done for me is turn me, even more than I was, into a rereader. I really I'm not in the mood for anything sad at all. And I've been going back and rereading books that I know are going to end satisfactorily, are not going to introduce any further things to keep me awake at night, mourning the way things are. And that's different, like in September 11th, 9/11, after 9/11, my reading changed dramatically in that I wasn't interested in reading fiction because fiction in some ways is so, whether it tries to be or not, it's so emotional. It's kind of hurly-burly. And what I wanted at that time, in those years, right after 9/11, was I just wanted sedate facts. I mean, I read a lot of history then, and not even stuff dealing with the topic, but just I didn't want the hurly-burly of fiction. But what all that's happening in our country these days, I've just been going back and doing a lot of rereading, and I've been doing a lot of rereading via listening, which has been just such a treat. And I was a late adopter of audiobooks. I never thought that I would enjoy them because it's not a way I take in information particularly, I don't think. But I'm just loving doing that. So the book I just finished is Belgravia, which is by Julian Fellows. It's now a TV series, which my husband and I both loved. And then we both got the book and listened to the book, which is so wonderful. And then I listened to Julian Fellows' Past Imperfect. I mean, they're the kind of big books that suck you in, and you're in a different place, and they're just exactly what I need now at this point.
Awesome. I think a lot of people probably will be writing that down.
Right.
So Thomas mentioned when he introduced you that you started the Getting Seattle to Read What If Seattle Read All the Same Book, and that inspired us to do the Read Across Lawrence program. And so I'm wondering, first of all, like, what was the first book chosen for that, and how it impacted the community there? And like secondarily, you know, right now communities really need to be brought together and to be having an experience together. And so I wondered if you had any recommendations for like any anti-racist reading that communities should be doing together right now.
So the first book that we did, and I have to say the thing I most regret is that we had that clunky name for the program, If All Seattle Read the Same Book. Now, thank goodness, in the years since 2003 when it began, I guess the first one was in 2003. No, well, whatever. 1998 was the first one. And now it's called Seattle Reads, which is a much better name. But the first one we did was Russell Banks' The Sweet Hereafter, which is just a fabulous book for book groups. And it's a book that deals with, it really exemplified everything that I wanted the program to be. I wanted people to be able to come together and talk about difficult issues with the book as the anchor. It's very hard to talk about difficult issues in a vacuum. The Sweet Hereafter deals with a bus accident and in a small town, and many of the children in the town being killed in that bus accident. And it's about guilt. It's about how we move forward from tragedy. It's a book that is still very meaningful to me. And one of the things that I think makes a good book for a discussion is a character-driven book, a book where you, when you turn the last page, you want to know what happened to those characters. And I remember Russell Banks came and spoke to different groups in libraries, and the first question that everybody would ask him is, what happened to this main character? And he would say, and this main character had lost everything. He had lost, I mean, his wife had recently died, his 2 children were killed in this bus accident, and Russell said, I don't know what happened to him. I don't know, which left all of us able to imagine for ourselves what happened to him. So I think that coincidentally in Seattle at that time, just before Russell came, when people were still reading the book, someone attacked a Metro bus driver on one of Seattle's many bridges, and the bus did not go over the bridge down to the ground below, but came very close to that. And the bus driver was, I believe, killed in that. So that really brought that home to everybody reading it. I think what programs like that do, I think, is they really, they bring a community together in a way that is safe. It's a way that gives you a starting point, and you can always bring it back. If you're leading those groups, you can always bring it back to the book. And so a book, there's a lot of good nonfiction out there, and anti-racism nonfiction that's out there that I think would be is very needful for people. People need to read those books and to think about it. But I guess I would go in a slightly different direction. And I guess what I would do is, for a book group, really, I think I would suggest a novel. And one of the novels that I might suggest is The Turner House by Angela Flournoy. Another one, and this one is memoir, but I think it would make a very, very good and timely book discussion, is Sarah Broom's The Yellow House.
Just read it.
Isn't it great? And there's so much to talk about. There's so much to talk about in that book. And then there's two novels that are so satirical that are so powerful. And one of those is by Paul Beatty, Beatty, called The Sellout. And that first page and a half of that book is painfully, hysterically funny. And he's African American, and he is really laying it all out. So there's that book. Another book that I would suggest, and I'm really excluding Colson Whitehead's bestsellers, and award-winning books, which everybody is aware of, and I'm trying to do some sort of under the radar stuff. Another book by an African-American writer, very satirical novel, a novel that's just brilliant, is called Erasure, and it's by a man named Percival Everett. And what Percival Everett does is, every single book of his is different. So if you love one of his, you can never be sure you're going to love the next one, because it's so different. I loved Erasure so much. And then another one that I think is so worth reading, another really under the radar novel, is called American Spy by a woman named Lauren Wilkinson, which is about a young African-American woman who goes to work for the CIA and is given a job that really calls into question America's racial politics. And I just thought of yet another one. I mentioned Colson Whitehead, and of course those books, The Nickel Boys and Underground Railroad, would be great. But really my favorite Colson Whitehead is his first novel called The Intuitionist, which is the story of a young African-American elevator inspector. And it's about race, and it's about what we owe one another. And any of those books I think would be just great for a big Lawrence Reads or individual book groups.
I like that. We just read The Yellow House. I run the Social Justice Book Club. And I do that, obviously there's great nonfiction that we read, but I do try to intersperse it with fiction, because I think that, sometimes like you said, you can get into the mindset of the other person and gather more empathy that way, just reading the facts about things. Right. And I was just thinking, what we talked about was like a good companion read, which we'd read before for The Yellow House, is Jessamine Ward. Why am I blanking? The one that she did about, why am I blanking on the name? The one she did about Katrina. So, yeah. Is it something the bones? Wait.
Salvage
the bones.
Right.
That just popped right out of my head. Yep. But like that, reading those together would be really good companion reads. Yes. And you would get, Sarah Broom's book is a really good narrative nonfiction, narrative memoir. But yeah, we try to do that all the time.
And another really good one that's not directly about race, but I think impacts. I think brings up issues of economic justice, is 3 Day. It's the one set in the hospital. It's a book set in the hospital in New Orleans, where the staff has to decide who is going. You remember that book? It's
yeah.
Right.
Okay. We'll
Well,
find it. I'm writing down everything that I'm trying to write down everything that you're suggesting so that we can make a list out of it. So
all right. And
I will figure that one out. Okay.
I can email you with it.
Okay. So I know you're on the Carnegie committee this year. How is that impacting your pleasure reading? You have to read a lot for that, correct?
Yes. So unfortunately, I've been going through some health stuff and just felt that and so the sort of health stuff and then the kind of mental space about not wanting heavy stuff. So I had to resign. I felt like I needed to resign from the Carnegie this year. But,
did you? Okay.
Yeah, but in 2017, I was the chair of the fiction jury for the Pulitzers. And that was the year that and the Pulitzers are interesting because the Pulitzer, there's a jury, a 3-person jury for each of the different categories. And the jury does not pick the winner. The jury recommends 3 finalists and doesn't rank them, but writes a justification for each one winning. And then the Pulitzer board chooses from among them, which is why some years when the Pulitzer board rejects the jury's recommendations, there's no award. So that's what we were afraid of. But when you're involved in judging something like that, or on the American Library Association's notable books, it really, what happens to most people is that they start piling up all the books they want to read once this is done. And that's what I did in 2017. And the winner, the Pulitzer Prize winner that year, was Andrew Sean Greer's wonderful novel, Less, which I just loved. And I love Andy Greer. And he's one of the people we interviewed for the Writers' Library. So.
Yeah, everybody should be getting on hold for that book. I can't remember when it comes out. Is it?
September 8th.
September 8th. Okay. Yes. We will be, I think, getting a lot of copies of that one. Okay. Well, you mentioned judging. Speaking of judging, my grandma always said, if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. But I am interested in how you describe books that you heartily dislike. No need to name any names. As readers advisors, we normally don't say when we don't like books sometimes, but sometimes you have to.
Yeah, if somebody asked me directly, like, oh, didn't you love this book? And it was one of those books that I actually didn't love, I feel like it's important to be honest about it. And so I'll say something like, there were 4 people in the world who didn't like this book, and I was one of them. Or unfortunately, I was one of them. And then I'll hasten to add, but that doesn't say anything about whether you'll like it or not. I think there are ways that we can talk about books that I made a decision a long time ago that I wasn't going to talk about when I do book talks or whatever, that I wasn't going to talk about books. I wasn't going to tell people what not to read, because there's so many books out there that I want people to read. So that's my way of dealing with it. If I don't like a book, I just don't, it doesn't appear in any of my lists, or I don't tweet about it. That's easier. But, when you think about why you don't like a book, if you really, or what kind of reader you are and what you're looking for in a book, that makes it much easier to talk about a book that just doesn't match who you are as a reader. Like, I'm always looking for character-driven, really well-written novels, although now I think I need a little more plot than I ever did before. So if there's a book that isn't well written, or just makes me cringe because it's so clunky, that's why I don't like that book. I mean, that's why I'm going to put that book down. And I think that that's fair. I think that's, it's just not my kind of book. And I think as a librarian, or as someone who's doing these talks and answering questions, that's not only legitimate, but an important thing to say.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you mentioned character driven. The four doorways.
Right.
Character is definitely my doorway into a book, I would say. And I'm finding that setting is increasingly for me. And I think some of that is also being interested in a little bit of escape and going somewhere else.
Right.
Right now, that's what I'm in the mood for.
Do you read fantasy then?
Not a ton, and you would think that I would, but what ends up happening is I always say, that's just not a genre I read in a lot, both sci-fi or fantasy that do a lot of world building, but every time I read something in those genres, I love it. And I don't know why I haven't flipped the switch in my brain to say, oh, I do like those genres.
So here's two books that I would suggest to you. They're both
Okay.
They're both character-driven fantasies where the world building is great. This one is called, they're both by Guy Gavriel Kay, and this one is called The Lions of Al-Rasan, which is a difficult title. And this one is called Under Heaven.
Okay.
And the first chapter, I talked about the first pages of Paul Beatty's book, which is just so amazing. The first chapter of Under Heaven, I think, is possibly the best first chapter I've ever read. So anyone who is
underlining that,
who is up for, and it's set in a fantasy but well recognizable China. In many years ago. But so anyone who wants a little bit of fantasy, I think Guy Gavriel Kay does that character-driven fantasy, and Patrick Rothfuss, which you certainly must have read.
Yes. Okay. I am underlining. Okay. Those. Well, so on the flip side, I guess, is there an author or a book that you think more people should know about right now?
Oh, yeah.
There's probably a bunch.
Right. I think that there are some books that are definitely quirky, and I'm kind of into quirkiness now. And one of the quirky novels that I've absolutely loved recently is called Temporary, and it's got a great cover. And it's about a young woman it's about the gig economy. It's a book that could have been called The Way We Live Now. If Trollope hadn't taken that title many years ago. But it's a young woman, but it's quirky. You've got to like quirk to like this book, whose life is a series of part-time jobs, temporary jobs that get, as the book progresses, weirder and weirder and weirder as the book goes on. At one point, toward the end of the book, her part-time job is to be a human barnacle. So she's, but her goal always is stability, is getting a job forever. I just absolutely loved that book. And it reminded me of a book that's a little bit older now called Treasure Island and 3 exclamation points. and that's one of the things that I love, and all the books I think that we've talked about have this, is voice. I love books in which the voice is so clear. And in the book, in my novel, George and Lizzie, so much of that is voice, that when it came time, and it's a third person narrator who's telling the story of this couple. And when it came time to do the audio of that book, I felt like I really needed to read it, because it was so clearly my voice that was telling about these characters. So voice, I think, is really important to me as a reader. And I find that if a voice doesn't bring me in, I'm going to have trouble with the book.
Gotta put it down.
Yeah.
You don't have time. You don't
No.
have time. You gotta read. Go move on.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. Did we just like we can tell people right now it's okay not to finish a book, right?
It
Because
is.
people struggle.
Yes.
So.
Can I give my rule of 50 then?
Oh, please do. Yes.
Okay, so years ago, I was on the radio and we were taking phone calls, and a woman said, well, I'm reading this book and I just don't like it. How many pages do I have to read before I give up on it? And so I said, just off the top of my head, I said, give a book 50 pages. Ask yourself at the bottom of page 50, when you get there, ask yourself, am I really enjoying this book? And if you are, finish it, of course. But if you're not, return it to the library, lend it to a friend, put it on your bookshelf. Your mood might change. Just because you give up on a book once doesn't mean you're never going to go back to read it. And so that for many years was the rule of 50. And the corollaries were, if all you care about is who marries whom, turn to the last page. If all you care about is who the murderer is, turn to the last. So that worked really well for a number of years until I myself started getting older. And then I came up with this addendum, which is, if you are 51 and up, so you have lots of time yet.
No, I don't.
When you turn 51, what you need to do is subtract your age from 100. And that number, which gets smaller every year, is the number of pages that you should read before you can guiltlessly give up on a book. The big reward, of course, being when you turn 100, you can legitimately judge the book by its cover.
Yeah, I still sometimes do judge a book by its cover, though, Nancy. I really do.
Oh yeah, no, covers are important. Covers are really important, and we all do that. But let me give a tip about finding, because I know there are people who love character-driven books, and a really easy way to find a book that's character-driven is to look for a book where the title is the name of the character, or the title is about a character, like Nick Hornby's About a Boy is, for example, a character-driven novel. There's 2 mysteries out by a writer named Rosalie Knecht, Knecht, and the first one is called Who is Vera Kelly? And I loved that one, and I loved the sequel, Vera Kelly is Not a Mystery. And I love mysteries that are character-driven.
I think there's a third Vera Kelly coming out, isn't there?
Is there?
Did I see that?
I hope so.
When did Vera Kelly's Not a Mystery come out?
I think it's too recent. I think it came out this year.
Oh, maybe. I was just on, I did a book club call with one of the publishers, and I thought they showed another one.
Oh.
I'll take a look.
Okay, email me. But who is coming up with a new book is Tana French.
Yeah, and people are going to go nuts over that.
Right. And I have to say, In the Woods is one of my favorite mysteries of all times. I haven't loved the others. I loved the first 3, but after that, I've grown less enchanted with them, I have to say. But boy, those first 3 were great. Oh, and another mystery series, I just want people to know about this. There's a writer named Adrian McKinty, McKinty, and his mysteries, the first one is The Cold, Cold Ground. They're also great audio books. There's 7 in the series, and they're all set in Belfast during the time of the Troubles, Belfast in the 1980s. And the main character, Sean Duffy, is a Catholic who's working for the primarily Protestant police force, the Royal Ulster Constabulary. And so he's trusted by no one. He's not trusted by his fellow policemen because he's Catholic and they're Protestant. He's not trusted by his Catholic neighbors because he's working with the prods. But they're great. They're just excellent, excellent mysteries as mysteries. You won't be able to figure out who done it. But they're also just great, a great way of learning some history, some recent history, which I always appreciate.
This was not a plant, but I just picked up this one yesterday. Do you know this one?
No.
The Ghost Factory. It's set in Belfast during the Troubles.
Really?
I think 1995, or like after the Troubles. 1995 is when it is. So, and I've just heard a ton of buzz about this, so I've started it, and it's really good. Very character driven.
Oh, good, good.
So there you go. Recommendation. Okay, so maybe this is just a question for me because I like to hear it as a librarian. But so, like our book squad vision is to connect readers with the stories that enrich their life. Like that's our elevator pitch right there. Do you have any stories from the trenches where you've given a reader a suggestion that they've come back to you and said, "This has changed my life. You've really made an impact"?
Not the sort of thing. First of all, let me say I love that tagline, and I wish that would be would be somewhere in every library's mission statement, because I think it's so important. I've heard that people have said, this book was so meaningful to me, Nancy, thank you for recommending it, and that kind of thing. But I don't have any knowledge that really would be that I could share.
You don't know the deep story about it.
I don't know the deep story. Right. I do know that when you're working in a library where you get to know most of the patrons, and you sometimes will order a book for a particular patron because you know that it's the kind of book that they love to read. And I did that. I put aside a book for a woman, and she came in and I gave it to her and said, here's a book I think you would really enjoy. And she sort of paged through it and she said, I'm just not in the right place in my life for this book. I'll come back and get it when things have kind of equalized or evened out. And I think that's such a telling, that says so much about reading and it says so much about how privileged we are as librarians who work with the public, because when you're talking to somebody about the books that they've loved, they're sharing their life with you, and we get to hear that, and we share in that, and that's a real I found that's a real privilege, because we're not social workers, we're not psychologists, we're not psychiatrists, we're librarians, and what we do is share books that will enrich people's lives, stories that will enrich people's lives, and they need that, and we're the only public entity that does that. So
how lucky are we?
How lucky are we? Indeed.
Okay, I want to have let's see, I'm not even sure where we are on time, but I did want to ask right now, trends in terms of leisure reading. Some pundits say like the Western genre is on its way out. There are some new genres on their way in. Like, what are you seeing in terms of trends that you think people would be interested in?
I think that people, I think the phrase that I despise, the phrase that I dislike the most, is when somebody describes the book as transcending its genre. So when we talk about that the Western is on its way out, certainly the kinds of books that used to be in libraries we shelved altogether in the Western genre. We're not getting that kind of very many, if any, of those books, but we're getting terrific novels that are Western novels, but we upgrade them out of the genre and call them, literary fiction. When people say to me, what's your favorite book? I can't answer that, because there's thousands of books that I've absolutely loved. But if you said, what book would you recommend that would have the best chance of the most people enjoying? The book that I would say is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, because it's a book that appeals to people who love good stories. I mean, when it's a book that appeals to people who love world building, who love a setting. I remember reading that book and feeling like I needed, a water bottle with me at all times, because that cattle drive was so dusty. I mean, I was thirsty all the time. And it's a book that won the Pulitzer Prize, so it's well written. But most importantly, that book has two main characters who you will never forget. So no matter what kind of reader you are, you have an entry point, a big entry point into that book. So I talking about genres, I think that a lot of people are in the same place I am, that they want a lot of lighter fiction, perhaps. I think that because to escape from the news and everything that's going on. And I think we're going to get a lot more of that. And I think that we need to stop disrespecting that kind of light reading, which many people find,
Give me a high five right now on that, Nancy. I agree. I think that when someone says that something is escapist as a derogatory term, it drives me nuts, because I'm like, right, that is not derogatory. Like, escaping to something is incredible. It's an incredible experience. So I don't find escapist bad at all. I hear that, I think uplit is the term that I'm hearing for those kinds of books that might be coming out.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that. Uplit. Mm-hmm. Uplit.
Yes.
And one of the best authors, an author who's uplit, who I would say is an uplit author, is Marian Keyes. Do you K-E-Y?
The Irish, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, she has a new book coming out, I think this spring, but my favorite book of hers is called The Other Side of the Story, which is really fun. And another wonderful character-driven uplit book that I would recommend is called The Diamond Lane by Karen Carbo, which I adore.
Okay. All right. I want to do this quick lightning round, and then I've got some book recommendations that people asked for from Facebook, so we're going to do that. But I want to do a lightning round game called Is It Okay to Read Here?
Okay.
I want permission from America's librarian to tell me. Okay. Dining room table.
So in my family, family of origin, we had a rule that if all four of us, my mother, father, sister, and I, were at the table eating dinner, we could not read. But if there were just three of us, and personally, I hoped always that my father was not there, that we were able to read. So.
Okay. All right. So there's a caveat on that one. All right. The symphony.
No.
Okay. Subway, both the train or the sandwich shop.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Bathroom.
Yes, absolutely.
In the kitchen while cooking.
Oh, that's not with a library book, I would say.
Okay. But let me say bathroom to that one too. Okay, movie theater before the feature starts, of
I
course.
have to say I am a reader at the movie theater before the feature starts, so I would say yes.
Okay, and this final one I have been mocked for, so I want to settle this one at a baseball stadium.
I knew you were going to say that. Yes, yeah. And whenever I go, personally, my sports of choice are football and basketball. I'm not a huge baseball fan, but I have to say the games that I have been dragged to, I always bring a book.
Right? But okay, and my husband added the caveat to that is, but you have to go with someone who will watch out for foul balls coming
Oh
at
yeah,
you.
definitely. Definitely. Yes.
Need to be careful for that.
Right.
Okay. So, all right. So here I'm going to have you do some book recommendations off the cuff. So Molly has asked, she's looking for and haven't quite found something like Ben Lerner's The Topeka School, which she liked better than his earlier books, but not from a white male perspective. She wants stylistically complex, non-linear, character-driven, with big ideas by a woman or person of color. The novelist read-alikes for this aren't great yet, and I haven't read any other books quite capturing what I loved about the Topeka School.
Wow, that's good. That's a good hard question. So I would do I would do the two I mentioned earlier, Paul Beatty's The Sellout or Percival Everett's Erasure. Certainly they both have big ideas, and they're, as I recall, they're not particularly linear either.
Okay.
I think I would go in that direction. Oh, there's another book. I might have to send you this other book because I'm not remembering
Okay.
the author.
I can get in touch with Molly and let her know.
Okay. Okay.
From Kathy, the Golden Age Mysteries, Josephine Tay, Dorothy Sayers wants read-alikes for those.
So there's a new publishing company called Middlebrow Books / Dean Street Books, who is reissuing a lot of those Golden Age mysteries. A writer whose books are in print and available, many of her books, is Catherine Aird, A-I-R-D. And they are a little bit later than Tay and Dorothy Sayers, but still in that sort of genre. I would put them together with that. But check out the mysteries from Dean Street and Middlebrow / Dean Street Books. They're doing that. Oh, and also Poisoned Pen Press, I think in Arizona, is reissuing a lot of those golden age mysteries.
Okay. Susan asks, she's read all of Donna Leon's Guido Brunetti series and all of Louise Penny's Armand Gamache series, and now what?
Yeah. So, nothing is going to be exactly like those, but I would actually try the McKinty books, the Adrian McKinty 7-book series, those mysteries. Another, not a series, but an author that I might try is Sarah Caudwell, Caudwell. And the first one is set in Venice, and it's called Thus Was Adonis Murdered. And a really good question to ask yourself when you're reading that book is Hillary, one of the main characters, male or female? Because it's never made clear, at least to me. So I would ask that question.
I like that.
And there's another novel. This has nothing to do with the answer to that question, but I'll just, because I love this novel. It's called The Towers of Trebizond by Rose Mccauley, a British writer. And it's so funny. I mean, it has a very angry camel in it. And the first line of that book is, "Take my camel, dear," said my Aunt Dot, as she climbed down from this animal when she returned from high mass. So that has everything in it. And Rose Mccauley was most interested in her in religion and animals, and there they are in that first sentence. That book, like Thus Was Adonis Murdered, you don't know whether the main character is male or female, and it doesn't matter. It's just in either book, it doesn't matter. It's just interesting to me that they didn't decide.
I like that. Okay, last one, 10,000 Doors of January. Loved the bookish elements. What should I read next?
So older titles, which you could luckily probably find one or two at the used bookstore, or if the library doesn't have them any longer. John Dunning does a whole bookish series, Dunning. The Air Affair by Jasper Fforde and the sequels to that, definitely The Air Affair, where books are the most important thing ever. And I think those would be really wonderful. What's the book by Zafran, the one that's set in Spain? Carlos Ruiz Zafran. You could find it, but
I'll find that one.
Yeah, that's another one.
I'll find it. Okay.
Oh, and Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore is another good bookish one.
And I always like, whenever people love bookish books, and this is not a novel, but I loved Dear Fahrenheit 451. Did you read that?
I didn't.
Oh my gosh, I think you would actually really like it. It's just hilarious and funny, and she's, talking to all of these books that she's had relationships with in various ways. So if you're looking for something uplifting and fun to read, that's a good one. Dear Fahrenheit 451. I really like it. Not a novel, but
that's fine.
Great nonetheless. Well, okay. I think we might be out of time. So I really want to thank McGrew Realty for their support in bringing Nancy Pearl. A huge thank you to you, Nancy. Thank you so much for being our, summer reading kickoff, and for, making me into the librarian that I am today, or that I aspire to be. You're never quite there. I did want to tell everyone, please remember to join us this week for our Party in Place events, and be sure to come to our culminating event on June 20th. Everything is on our website, lplks.org/partyinplace. And that's all we have for today. Happy reading to everybody, and happy reading to you, Nancy.
Thank you. Thank you, Polly. It's just been great.
Thank you.